Hey everybody! I've come on to talk about the Mars-Pluto opposition, which is becoming exact this weekend, but we are without a doubt feeling it now as it's building up, because usually this is an intense transit. When are we not talking about intense transits? I feel like the whole of 2025 so far has just been intense transits. And when we're talking about the intensity of this one really coming from Pluto being the furthest out planet and creating the biggest change that we experience in our birth charts and kind of collectively. So as individuals, as well as in a collective sense, as a kind of species, as humanity here on Earth. Pluto is always the greatest transformer. It is the death and rebirth, resurrection, rising from the ashes energy. And Mars is the antagonizer, the one that likes to cause trouble. It can be sharp, it can be harsh, it can be confrontational, it can be going to war. It can, I always feel like, yes, it is known as a malefic planet, but that doesn't mean that Mars is always out to cause trouble. I think it's really important to call that out, because Mars can actually be really helpful. Particularly helpful if you have a nighttime chart. If you were born after the sunset, then Mars is typically more helpful in your birth chart. If you were born during the daytime, after the sun had risen, then Mars is typically going to be the more difficult planet in your chart. But that doesn't mean that everything about Mars is difficult, and that say, for example, you are a daytime chart, like I'm a daytime chart. I don't hate Mars. I actually really love Mars. Mars doesn't always bring me strife and difficult words between myself and other people, or difficult situations, or doesn't always bring me accidents in the kitchen when I'm like cut my finger, if it's in my first house of body, or applying to my moon in some kind of way, which might bring about those sorts of experiences. And you might hear astrologers talking. I need to slow down. You might hear astrologers talking about Mars kind of bringing accidents into your life when it's transiting your moon or your first house, because those are the places typically connected to body. But Mars can bring really great stuff. Like, it can bring an increase in energy, particularly when its dignity changes, as it has done recently. Mars in Cancer has a real lack of dignity. That doesn't mean that if you have Mars in Cancer in your own natal chart, that your Mars still doesn't have some of these benefits. Yes, it's true to say that if you have Mars in a debilitated state, like in the sign of Cancer, or in the sign of Libra, or in the sign of Taurus, yes, you might struggle a bit more with accessing Mars in its kind of purest form. So you might find actually that confrontation makes you feel really uncomfortable, and that you try and avoid it at all costs. But actually, the thing is that sometimes we need confrontation. Sometimes we need to get the heat outside of our bodies, as opposed to keeping it inside, where it can manifest in negative ways towards ourselves, as opposed to having a healthy amount of kind of debate and confrontation outside of ourselves with other people, bringing our outside world into our own lived experience. So yeah, back to my point that if you were born in the daytime, after the sun had risen, before the sun had set, and Mars is typically your your trickiest planet, there's still so many great things about Mars that Mars can bring, like increased energy, like increased passion and drive and enthusiasm towards projects or relationships, or work or home, or whatever it is that you're trying to activate at the moment, and bring more energy to. And yeah, Mars is now in Leo, where it has much more dignity than where it was in Cancer for such a prolonged period of time during the Mars retrograde, which began way back in November of 2024. So we have got an increase in energy and passion and enthusiasm in our Leo house of our birth chart. So we all have Leo somewhere in our birth chart. Don't look at my nails, they are awful. So we all have Leo somewhere in our birth chart. Even if we don't have planets or points in the sign of Leo, like I don't have any planets or points in the sign of Leo, but I still experience Leo and the ruling planet of the zodiac sign Leo, which is the sun, in a certain way in my unique birth chart. So we can track out what is my natal sun sign, look for your own natal sun sign, because it's bringing that into your story of how this Mars in Leo transit is now playing out. And remember that we are still actually just finishing up the entirety of the Mars retrograde story. So yes, Mars has been direct now for some time. It's back in the sign of Leo, but it's still got a few degrees to go until it's covered the post retrograde shadow zone, which is the area of the zodiac that it's already covered during the retrograde journey. So but now it's in direct motion, and it's bringing that finality, the resolutions, the resurrection. And resurrection feels like such a big word here, such an appropriate word to use for the Mars-Pluto opposition. Because Mars is in Leo, Pluto is in Aquarius, and we will now receive this opposition roughly every couple of years for the next 20 years, whilst Pluto is in Aquarius. Could be 19 years now, but yeah, roughly 20 years. And we will get a check-in point with this opposition energy. And for the previous kind of, 17, 18 years, when Pluto was in Capricorn, we received this opposition from Mars in Cancer every couple of years. And actually, so there's something in, again, the dignity of Mars. When we were receiving that opposition from Mars in Cancer to Pluto in Capricorn for the last 20 or so years, that Mars in Cancer felt particularly challenging because Mars was bringing up this kind of defensive attack, antagonistic energy towards everything that's connected to Cancer, which is a moon ruled sign. So anything connected to home, family, body, comfort, nurturing, nourishment, food. Particularly interesting with the food thing since Uranus went into Taurus back in 2018, because there's been a real awakening around our food production, our resources. There's not so much this sense of food safety that perhaps we experienced like back in the kind of 90s and early noughties, where food felt quite accessible. And I was just talking to someone this morning about how expensive toothpaste is. I know toothpaste isn't food, right? But the cost of living in general, including food and so many important like daily things that we use, has just risen so much the last few years, particularly since Uranus went into Taurus. There's been this real like destabilizing energy around solid material resources. That includes food, farming, agriculture, how we produce food, lab grown meat, all of these kinds of things. And every 2 years over the last 20 years, since when Mars in Cancer opposed Pluto in Capricorn, something about the safety around food and resources came into our experience. So now we are moving away from that energy, and actually Uranus is going into Gemini this year, so that's a reawakening and a moving forward in sort of exponential growth kind of way around ideas to do with technology, Gemini things, communications, wit, humor. Like I imagine the comedy scene will be like off the charts whilst Uranus is in Gemini. However, I digress. Coming back to the Mars-Pluto opposition, just had so much extra stuff to get in there. So now Mars is in Leo. It has, it's bringing to our attention every sense of energy and passion, how much we want to put towards our ego, and how much. So that's Mars in Leo, ego, and then opposing Pluto in Aquarius. That's much more about a collective kind of experience and humanity as a whole, as opposed to the self, which is much more the kind of Leo energy. It's very Aries as well, the self. But yeah, Leo, that kind of like shine light, be a spotlight, celebrate. It's like famous people and the celebration and the kind of obsession, in fact, of our enjoyment of kind of knowing famous people online, watching famous famous people in films. I think about like growing up and putting posters of like Leonardo DiCaprio on my wall, and like I don't know how it works now. Do teenagers still have posters on their walls, or do they have like perhaps they've got a screensaver of their favorite famous person on their phone or something like that. Perhaps that's kind of how it works these days. I don't know. But yeah, this kind of obsession with fame and what it means to be famous in a spotlight type way, and then in a kind of bigger way. Like, is it okay to be famous? Is it not okay to be famous? What does that really mean? And I think more and more there's so much poison coming out of the famous community. You see so many people that have been famous for many, many years now, and now they're being pulled up on things. Now it's turning out that they've done really like horrendous things over the years, where they've like abused their power. This is a very Plutonian thing. So abuses of power now coming out. Famous people getting put into prisons, having their own power restricted, like their money cannot buy them out of this thing. It's that kind of energy. So there may be things like that in the media, particularly in this week, as we finish up this week, and Mars and Pluto are, really completing that intense opposition. And then in personal ways, we are thinking about our own egos, we're thinking about the collective, we are thinking about, Leo rules creativity, it rules business as well. And, does your creativity support the masses? Is your creativity helping the masses, or is your creativity just all about you? Because if it is all about you, then Pluto may not be interested in that creativity kind of going any further in that direction. Maybe your creativity is asking to be seen and valued and acknowledged in a new light. Perhaps that old version of your creativity is done and you're now ready to move away from that. And Pluto is forcing that change. That's a big thing about Pluto. It has no qualms about when it removes things from our lives. It is just like that version of your creativity is done. We're taking that away, and it doesn't necessarily feel fair. Sometimes it may feel, okay, if this Mars-Pluto opposition isn't directly impacting your natal chart, then you might not feel it as intensely. That is important to say as well. It's happening at 3 degrees. So 3 degrees of Leo for Mars and 3 degrees of Aquarius for Pluto. So if you have planets or points, being the AC, DC, MC, IC, at between anything like 0 to 6 degrees of the fixed signs, which are Leo, Scorpio, Taurus, and Aquarius, not in any particular order there, then you'll be feeling this much more powerfully. If you were born in 1984, then and if you have Pluto in Scorpio, then perhaps 1985 as well, considering the retrograde. If you have Pluto in the very early degrees of Scorpio, 0 to 5 degrees of Scorpio, then this is also, this Mars-Pluto opposition between Leo and Aquarius is also being pulled into your Pluto square, which is one of the midlife transits that everybody experiences. And the people that are experiencing their Pluto square right now are the people that are between the ages of about 40 and 42. Then this is bringing in a whole extra life area. If you have the Sun in Scorpio as well as Pluto in Scorpio, then there's a lot of intensity in your Scorpio house of your birth chart. But if you have the Sun in Cancer and Mars in Leo and this Pluto in Aquarius, then that's bringing in 3 birth chart houses as opposed to just the 2. So this could be igniting 3 whole sign houses in your birth chart, bringing in very, very powerful transformation energy, asking you to really look authentically at some renovation work that is going on. We're thinking about ego, self, creativity, fun, colorfulness as well. That's a big thing. Fairness, humanitarian, inventiveness as well. That's a very Aquarius thing. And then if we pull in the Pluto in Scorpio, for those that are going through their Pluto square, focusing on this because I am going through my Pluto square, so I am part of this generation. But I know that there's quite a few of you similar age to me that will also be experiencing this, which is why I mention it. Then look to the Scorpio elements in your life as well, which rules authenticity, it rules the depth researching, it rules sex and power, and like emotional intensity as well. What else is Scorpio? Scorpio, deeply passionate, and has a really strong spidey sense as well, a real strong understanding of picking up on vibes in a room and knowing where the safety is and where the danger is coming from as well. And finally, to say that if you would like to read about everything that I've just spoken about in this post, in this short video about Mars in opposition to Pluto, then I have put a new blog post up on my Substack, which is all about delving into the Mars-Pluto opposition. It goes back to the last 2 times that Mars and Pluto opposed over the last few months as well. So the dates are in there. So if you are like me and you love to do the retrospective research about your own experience of this particular transit to really try and get the most out of it, because remember, the 3rd time that we get the transit after a retrograde has happened, that's usually when the resolution and the resurrection, particularly in this case, is coming to light. And there's more about that on my Substack, which is Freya Astrology over at Substack. I'll put the link in my bio as well.